Welcome to Thursday Book Club. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land and I'm pay my respects to elders past and present. For anyone new, my name's Suzanne Leal. I'm the author of six novels, most recently The Year We Escaped and The Watchful Wife. Again, as most of you will know, our book club has been going for over 5 years now, having been started in 2020 when COVID began as a way of connecting writers online. And things have been great. I'm surprised that so much time has passed. And I really do think that amongst ourselves, we've made a lovely community with no pressure. So thank you very much, everybody, for your support. Anyone who wants to join or who's watching this, if you just go to my website, suzanneleal.com, you can sign up. It'll give you the newsletter, and that will give you the code to get into the weekly book club. Now, though, I'm delighted to be in conversation with Gail Holmes, whose debut novel is In the Margins. Welcome to you, Gail.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. It's great to be here.
Now, you've got some exciting news before we delve into In the Margins. Apart from your hair looking lovely, what's today brought to you?
Yeah, I was just mentioning earlier that I had just pressed the send button. I just sent the manuscript for my second novel to my agent today. So it's like celebration.
And your agent is my agent, so we're sort of
Yeah,
a little bit related, aren't we, Gail? In fact, that's why we came
right.
to each other. So, do you have a working title? Do you have anything you can tell us about it?
I won't tell you the working title because it may change.
Sure.
But I'm quite happy with it. I just changed it myself about 2 days ago. That's why I'm not going to share it.
Good, 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 good. Well, look, babies' names, yes, you can put them
But
close.
it's set in the 1930s to 40s. It's a mystery with some crime in it, and it's a coming of age novel.
Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. Watch this space.
Yeah.
Um, Gail, I want to talk about In the Margins, but
Yeah.
first I want to talk about you because you're not the stereotypical writer who did creative writing from university and then worked in humanities. Your trajectory to writer has been quite different. What did you study at university?
I studied civil engineering. Yes, and then I worked as a civil structural engineer in a big company for and the first 10 years of that was really becoming a professional engineer, a chartered civil engineer, and I built very large structures. And then I moved more into the business side of the company. I did an MBA, moved more into the business side. But I was still also technical manager in some areas I worked, as well as commercial manager and CFO type roles, chief financial officer type roles within the companies within the overarching company. So those types of roles are what was the bulk of my career.
To me, that seems completely at opposite poles to creative writing. Like the idea of me making something physical that needs to stand up is frightening, whereas a world in my imagination, no problem.
Yeah.
Tell me when you started to delve not only into physical structures, but also imaginary structures by means of
Um,
creative writing.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I was out in Shanghai working in a role where I was commercial manager and a technical manager. I had my three little boys out there with me, and I think it was around about 2000 when I arrived there, and China was a very different place even from today. It was just opening up to the West. Shanghai was kind of physically about not quite half the size, but probably about 60% of the size it is now. A whole half of it on the other side of the river hadn't been built yet. And it was rapidly changing, and old Shanghai was disappearing. And I knew I was there at a special time, and it made me lift the pen and start writing short stories about the people I knew in Shanghai, and just the funny stories about what I was seeing in life there. And I would send them back to friends in the UK. And one of my friends, who was an English teacher, said to me, "Oh, Gail, you can write." And I thought, "Can I?" I can't believe it. I thought it's quite funny. So that's where I started, and I thought that would just be it. But when I think it had just opened up something, because when I came back to London, um, I was pregnant with my fourth child, first daughter, when I came back to London, and when she was born, and I was awake at nights, I would have a pen and a notebook. And I can't remember the notebook not being there, so I can't remember putting it in there, but I can remember the notebook and pen being in my bedside drawer. And when I was awake and she'd gone back to sleep and I was still awake, I would write, and I would write until I was tired, and then I would put it in. And it amazed me what was coming out in the writing, things from my childhood, all sorts of things coming out, but not in a just, they were just coming out. They were just pouring out of me onto the page. So that's how it started. And then when I left that company, that I did write some short writing courses and started writing, and it's just really been a big part of my life since then.
That's extraordinary that you're feeding your fourth child, or at least settling your fourth child, and rather than going straight back to bed, you're up writing. I remember when I started writing, or I wanted to start writing, but I was working, and I thought, I'll have a baby. That'll do it. If I have a baby, then I'll have heaps more time, all solved. And of course, I had a baby that didn't sleep, but I couldn't have for the life of me have written. But hearing from what you're saying that it was unusual or it surprised you what came out. Do you think because you were sleepy, sleep deprived, you were less censoring of what you were writing?
I think so. I think so. And I was willing to, because no one else was seeing it, and the only place it was going was in this drawer. I just let things come out, what were happening. But I still find when you talk about that being sleepy, I still find that sometimes my most creative time
Mm.
is when I'm kind of almost, if I have like these great ideas at the time when I'm relaxed. So not wired, but quite relaxed. So I used to find a time for me, for example, when the kids here in Australia, when I was just about to go to do the pickup, that kind of hour after lunch, but before the school pickup, and I'd be quite relaxed but awake, if you know what I mean. And I would be, I would just be really quite creative in that time. So in an unforced time, the best stuff would come out.
Given your time in Shanghai and given that you're at such a time of transition there, I would have imagined a first novel would be set in Shanghai, but in fact, it couldn't be really further from the truth. In the margins, tell me where it's set and how the inspiration came to you.
Well, it's set in the middle of England in Staffordshire and in 1647. So right in the middle of the 17th century. And it's about a book collector inspired by a real person, a book collector called Frances Wolfreston. And the inspiration came when I was doing my master's at Melbourne Uni. I took a subject called History of Books and Reading. And a couple of the early lessons in that were in the rare books room,
Mm.
the library at Melbourne University. And the rare books room is a special place where you need special permission to go in there, and you go around um, a lot of long, twisty corridors. You have to leave all your belongings out. Your hands have to be scrupulously clean. And then you go in, and there's all these wonderful books there. And we were studying the history of the printed book was what we were studying. So from the Gutenberg Bible onwards. And And I really, I couldn't believe how much I loved being in that room. It really, it just, even when I think about it now, I'm still quite surprised because my love of books really came back to me. My love of Shakespeare came back to me. I'd completely forgotten. I hadn't really thought about Shakespeare since school, but I really enjoyed Shakespeare at school, and I particularly loved Julius Caesar. I know, sounds crazy, but I did Latin and I loved the Julius Caesar as well as some of the other plays. So I was reading all these, looking at all these old books, and then I realized that everything was written, published, and collected by men. And that female engineer inside me was thinking, what's going on here? Where are the women? And I had to ask the question, were there any female book collectors? And there weren't any of Frances's books there in that book room, but the tutor told me about Frances being a book collector. So I went off and researched her, found out she'd collected 500 books, including preserving the only surviving copy of Shakespeare's first ever published work, that she'd written her name on her books. And I decided to write an essay about Frances. And out of that essay, when I was researching that, I found her will, which is
Mm.
a gorgeous, sort of A3 sized handwritten document.
Where was it? Where was the will?
Well, I found it that the will is actually, oh, I don't know where it's physically held. That's a good question, Suzanne. But I found an online copy and various snippets of it in different academic papers. But I now have an A3 color copy that her great grandson, times 16, gave me.
A-
So
And why was the will interesting?
the will is, well, it's interesting because women had literacy was 10% in the and women had very few property rights. They were considered to be owned by their father, the women, and then by their husbands. So everything they owned personally went to them. So it was very unusual to have any property rights, and yet here was Frances writing a will. She was one of the few women, the few records of women having wills at that time. There's not that many records. There are some records, but so she's writing this long will. The start of it, and a will is very much in the first person, isn't it?
Mm.
I, Frances Wolfreston, being of sound mind, and it's squeezed in, all the writing squeezed into this big A3 document. And then it's quite transactional. It's the start, and then the last two paragraphs, second to last, is a paragraph about her books and how she wants them kept together as a library of books and she leaves them to her middle son and and she wants people to be able to borrow from them. She wants it to be used. People can borrow the books and put them back in the book's place. So it's very clear that every book has its spot. So she's quite a meticulous person. But then the very last paragraph is about her youngest son, Maidi, who has a disability of some kind. And she writes in quite a heartfelt way of how she wants his siblings to look after him and get a man to follow him about and to continue to love and care for him in the way that I have always shown you your whole lives. So very, and when I read that, I'd been doing all this work for all these essays. I just looked at all of these books. I had a database of them. I had, how much research you're doing when you're writing an essay, loads of stuff going on. And then I saw this last paragraph, read it, and I got quite emotional and started crying. And I thought, I and I think it's because I realized that she was a woman. She wasn't only this achiever who'd done all these things from history, but
Mm.
she was actually a woman who really, she had her children and she really loved all her children. And that love just came out of the will, it was just there. And I thought, I'm going to write about you, Frances. So that's I did my thesis, a creative thesis on her, and then eventually that became in the margins.
Huh. 1647. Now, for there are some historians amongst us, I can see tonight.
Right.
So apologies to the historians who know everything, but it's a particularly interesting time. Can you just give us the context of why 1647 was the year you chose and what was happening both either side of that year?
Yeah. So I chose 1647 because Francis's mother got arrested in 1647. And Francis's mother got arrested for recusancy, which is basically being a secret Catholic. She wasn't attending the church services. Now, in the lead up to 1647, and Frances is a Protestant rector's wife, a Puritan Protestant rector's wife, and her mother's been arrested for being a secret Catholic. So quite a bit of tension going on. And the lead up to 1647 is the sort of year of peace between the First English Civil War, which lasted 4 years, and then, although the characters in the book don't know it, there's trouble brewing, and there's going to be another civil war. So readers and historians reading it kind of know much more than the characters in the book because we know the history that's going on before it. But on the lead up to the Civil War, what you had was the rise of Puritanism in the UK, and that really you have to go back to Henry VIII. Before Henry VIII, the whole country is completely Catholic. But Henry VIII wants to split from the Church of Rome, set up the Church of England, and from that point on, it becomes illegal to be a Catholic. And then in 1560, some 30 years or so after that, an Act of Parliament's introduced just to really grind that into the law of the land, and some of those laws are still exist today. It's not illegal to become a Catholic, but some of the laws that were put into place in that Act of Parliament are still hanging around in our constitution in the UK today.
Is there any law in particular that stands out to you?
Yes. So the law that anyone who watched The Crown might have come across. I've been rewatching it recently, I must admit, because I slightly love it. But there is a law that the monarch or anyone who's directly in line to the throne cannot marry a Catholic. They used to not be able to marry a divorced person, but they can marry a divorcee now, and they can marry diversely now, anyone anywhere in the world. However, they cannot marry a Catholic. It
Wow.
you can't. It's not there. It's too much of a threat, considered a threat to the Church of England, and that's still a law today. Yeah. But Charles at one point went out with the Catholic, but he wasn't allowed to marry her. King Charles, many long time ago. And some of the royals have, had Catholic girlfriends, but they haven't been allowed, not been allowed, because it's not allowed in law.
Wow. And
That's everything.
and if the Catholic bride to be, or yes, bride to be, were to were to denounce Catholicism, would that
Um,
or not?
but I don't know the details of that, Suzanne. But I know if they are a Catholic, um, if they are actually a Catholic, it's illegal. Yeah.
Interesting. So I
Yeah.
come from puritanical stock, Protestant, and I tend only to marry Catholic golf driving
Yes.
ministers.
Yeah. I've got both in my family. I've got the German Puritans and the Irish Catholics. I've got them all hanging around.
Interesting because it seems such an arcane idea.
Yeah, it does.
Say, I mean, the law can keep with its some very arcane ideas. How fascinating.
But yeah, that is just those who are in direct succession to the throne, so in that triangle of people. So beyond that, it's fine. It's the threat. And that's because the head of the Church of England is the head of the royal family. So it's to protect the church. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, Frances is a
Mhm.
book collector. She's a strong woman. She's a mother. Um, she's also a bit of a rebel.
Yeah.
What was there that was rebellious about her that appealed to you?
I think in firstly, it was that she wrote her name as an ownership mark in her books. So she wrote Frances Wolfreston, her book. So of the 500 books, about half of them were literature. In all of the literature, she's written her name in it. She in some of the books that were particularly religious, she didn't write her name in. But all of the literature, every single one, has her name in. So you can start to see from how she's written her name that it's clearly an ownership mark, and that she by the books she's collected and some of the other comments she makes in them, you start to get little clues about her character. So, for example, she writes in a book called A Crystal Vase. She'll write in praise of women, a good one. In Othello, she clearly doesn't like the story of Desdemona or what happened to her, where she says a sad one because she's not, and you just pick up. Now, the margins are a particularly difficult place to write in back then. Lots of people wrote in the margins, but they were like the social media of the day. They were very public. If people came into your house, they would look at the books, look in the margins, and be able to see what you'd written. So you could be very easily judged by what you'd written there. And this is a time of witches, lots of witches being hung in the UK, and I mean a lot in the lead up to the Civil War. There were witches. The idea of women being accused of witchcraft had reached fever pitch. For example, in one village in an eastern county of England, the self-appointed young man who was the witchfinder general had found 23 witches in one small, what you call in England a village, but what would be a small regional town here. Um, 23 witches in one place, of which 5 died in prison, and the rest were all found guilty of witchcraft and hung. So, and that's just one example. That witchfinder general, in the space of 18 months, was responsible for the death. He didn't kill them himself, but he caught and had persecuted between 250 and 350 women in about 18 months in the 1640s up to 1644.
So this is what Frances is up against.
This is what Frances is up against. So her taking a stand for books that were considered by the Puritans to be entertainment, and she's writing her name over them. And not only her name, but comments as well, and sometimes quite progressive comments for the time. So I think what she did was really admirable. It was great for literature. And yeah, so
Fascinating.
that's what drew me to her initially. And then the idea of her mother being arrested, and the tension that must have created in the family. And I thought, wow, there's a story here about how what life was like in Puritan times, what life was like for women in Puritan times, and how on earth do you become a very successful book collector as a woman in this time when women are really only allowed to behave in this very small operating place. So.
Given that Frances existed and her mother's arrest was something that happened, how much license do you feel that you can take in molding a character from the information you have?
Um, well, this is something I wrestled with early on, because I was trying to stick very hard and fast to the biographical details that were known and the specific book collection. But the fact is, in the biographical details, there's just a lot of gaps. There's just a lot of life gaps in it. In order to tell an interesting story about how the book collection and why these particular books and what did books mean to Frances? Why was she a collector? How did the love of books arrive? To get to that level of information, I think you have to use the ingredients you can pick up from various pieces, and then it had to be imagination, and using the historical research to create the world and then populate the world and bring that story to life. So I felt that I felt like I had to move to a place of imagining, but I wanted to keep it really as authentic as I could, to really that it felt to me that it could be real,
Mm.
that it could be real. So everything about what's going on in the background is quite real. The places are real. I've visited the house. I've spoken to the family, and and they're actually quite happy that it's a fiction book about her because, and this might upset some of the historians listening, but I think her great grandson times 16's view, Paul's view was that, sometimes when the historians come, they will take a few points of information and actually will extrapolate quite a lot from these pieces of information. And that sometimes as the family look at their history and see what the historians have done with it, they feel like some of that's been fictionalized. So they said to me, well, if you're being honest and saying you're writing fiction, well, that's great because then you can put in what you like because it's fiction. So it's that kind of tension. Whereas I don't feel that I feel like mine is quite grounded fiction. And I've been in the historical note at the back, I've tried to be quite clear where I've deviated from fact and the things that are very true and real. I, I've I've stated very clearly what is and what isn't. But I did deliberately change names because there are 11 Franceses. Her husband was Francis, her oldest son was Francis, and there were several other Franceses in close family. So it would have been, so Francis said to Francis, said to Francis.
About Francis.
That was one of the first changes I made because I realized if I couldn't understand it, what chance would anyone have reading it? And the other quite big change I made, which I thought long and hard about, was the number of children, both in Frances's family and the children she had. And that was purely, I reduced those significantly because Frances is one, oh, she's the oldest of 22 children. Yeah, so to actually, and the family was, her family are in the story, but as a background story to try and include details in of them that would, it just felt like it was really going to clutter. It was just going to be a lot of clutter, or the book would have to be much longer. And would it really be adding to the story? So my judgment on that was not really. So, so there's the family's reduced there, and in terms of her number of children, the point at which she's at. What I've been really true about on there is that she's lost children because she had lost children in real life, and I really wanted to explore that. I wanted to spend some time with that. But she had 6 surviving children, and at the point you leave Frances in the book, she's having the third of those surviving children, but she could go on and have more, and she's suffered some losses of children. So I wanted to capture that.
I'm mindful of the time and also that there may be questions from our viewers. If you do have a question, have a think, pop it in the chat line. And while we're waiting for that to trickle in, Gail, recommendations. We always ask our
Yeah,
authors
recommendations.
for 3 recommendations. Do you have 3 recommendations,
I
book
do.
recommendations for us?
Um, And do you just want the name of the book, or do you want a comment on them as well?
As you please.
Okay. Unsettled by Kate Grenville, uh,
Mm.
which I've really enjoyed. I've read quite a lot of Kate Grenville, but I read this recently, and I particularly enjoyed it because it's her sort of retracing her family history, but also reflecting a bit on herself as a writer and her views on how her views of history have changed as she's been writing. So I found that a really interesting read. The second one was Dusk by Robbie Arnott, set in Tasmania, and that's just a really lovely book, I think, and really captures the Tasmanian landscape well. So it's a really great novel. And the 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 third one, which is probably really two, I reread, I think given the situation that's happening in Europe, I think I've been thinking quite a lot about Europe. So I reread Stasiland recently by Anna Funda, which I found really fascinating. And that set me on reading another book by Thomas Harding called The House on the Lake, which is also set in Berlin, but covers a much longer period from pre-Second World War right up to almost today. And I enjoyed reading, I kind of read Stasiland and then went on to The House on the Lake. And it just gave me two different sort of perspective of how it felt and how history felt there. And the House of the Lake, the house is the thing. People move in and out of this house, but it's on a lake and it goes down to the foreshore of this lake. But but the Berlin Wall, it's a real house and it's history rather than historical fiction. And the wall gets built between the house and the lake. This is the first wall, and then the gap in the middle, and the second wall. Um, and then as you go right through the history of the book, eventually it gets taken down, and then you get the kind of reunification thing happening. So I found that just really fascinating. It wasn't an area I'd explored in any great depth before, and I found that those two quite complementary.
Excellent, excellent. What a fabulous compilation of recommendations. Now, it seems that you've told us all we wanted to know. So, if there are any questions that start to come in after this week, I'll pop them through to you by email. Not too many because you're off to the
Yeah.
UK, are you not?
Yes, I'm off to the UK on Sunday. My oldest son's getting married over there, so should be a big family get together. Be lovely.
Excellent. Have a lovely trip, and
Thank you very much.
thank you very much for your time, Gail. Fascinating
Thank,
conversation.
thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody. See you next week.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.